Well, we have 13 people, so.
Yeah. So, hello everybody. It's really nice to see so many different faces. Um, welcome. Welcome to this, I think, to the fourth episode in the series of Living a Gentler Life with Dr. Bill Pettit. I must say, I've been excited all day. um, I've been waiting and looking forward to this conversation for a long time. So as always, I'm really not big on introductions. I think it's safe to say that the people on this call know who Dr. Bill Pettit is and how many years of experiences he has. I approached Bill because the first time I heard about Dr. Bill and I heard his surname and Michael Neil said Pettit. I said, Pettit? And I was following a course and I heard his name being repeated, but then, you just hear the name. And then I came across him on YouTube. I think, Bill, you were giving a talk for the Jewish, I don't recall the name exactly. You were wearing a red t-shirt. It looked like a Hawaiian t-shirt.
Hmm.
And you were saying a story and then you stopped and tears started, you were really emotional and tears started to roll down your face, and I really could feel the place you were coming from and I was really touched by it. And there and then I said, and it took me a while to pluck up the courage to actually contact you. And then eventually I wrote to you, and here we are. So the intention of this series, and I got inspired by the series because I know I've met people who are having a gentler experience of life. So I record these calls and I share them on YouTube in the hope that someone might hear something, because I heard something from George Pransky the first time. I mean, it was just one thing he said, and I was smitten. It was like I was home. I found home. I came home. So, Bill, as we said in our exchange, I think mostly what I would like to hear, but then I would like to open up this conversation to the participants, to all these people who took the time to join us today, is to hear about your gentler experience of life, if that even makes sense, and how it touched your life, to talk about stories, and that's it. So I'll give the floor to you.
Okay, Diane, do you remember what it was? I mean, you never know what it is that for each person touches that place, but do you remember what Dr. Pransky said that touched you so deeply? Or was it just the feeling that he was speaking from?
I remember him saying that he went home after Sid. He was angry at Sid because Sid had told him that in his practice what he actually does was take people back to their pain, dig up all the pain again.
Right.
And I think that really struck me, because I had been in analysis, I'm in and out with psychotherapists for 20 odd years. And George was really angry at Sid, and he went away feeling angry, but then something Sid said stayed with George. But I don't think it's not just that. If I think about it, when I think about it, George I could feel George was,
Mm-hmm.
he was at peace.
Mm-hmm.
There was something, there was peace.
Sure, sure, sure. You could, when he talked about how his life changed, you could feel that it had truly changed dramatically. Huh? You could feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he went from, I remember him saying, yeah, I went from 80,000 to $8,000 a year. And he was not worried about it because he knew.
Mm-hmm.
And there were other things, but I think he was talking really slowly. It was his state of mind, his
Yes.
state of being.
Yes. Well, I'm more than happy to talk about that. One thing that and sometimes we could have done it maybe ahead of time, but if there are 2 or 3 or 4 people, we don't have that many people. We don't want to take too much of our time, but we've allotted a full 90 minutes if we need it. So I would love it if people, I don't know whether they have to unmute themselves or you unmute them, if anybody has a question that even whatever their level of, maybe they can say what their level of exposure is to the principles, but it doesn't matter if they even do that. If they have a question that's just still there for them, that they would hope that maybe I would do my best to address, I would like to hear it so they could get it off their mind, and I could put it on mine somewhere and see if I can address it in some way. So would that be okay with you, Diane?
Certainly, I'll go with the flow. So,
Yeah.
so if you, since we're not so many and I have a full view of you guys, you can physically put your hand up, or to manage the participants down bottom, next to your name. I don't know if the hand up is there on yours. On mine, it's inexistent. But anyway, just wave. So we have Mary Mann.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Diane, and thank you, Bill, for asking this, because I am actually currently in the north of London, and I'm living here with an older lady who is very, very depressed. She has been since her husband died. She's attempted suicide twice, and she's just she has macular degeneration in one eye, and she has just discovered that she has a swelling in the other eye, and they're not likely to be able to improve it. And so she is blind to the point where she can't do anything detailed like read or whatever. And I get a sense that just by studying, I took this opportunity to live with her so that I could study the Beyond program with the innate health people, Brian and Terry Rubenstein. And I'm well into the program. In fact, it's soon coming to an end. And I've felt tremendous shifts in myself and in just so much more peaceful in myself. And I have on occasion sort of tried to introduce this friend to the 3 principles and to the power of thought, and that she doesn't need to continue indulging in these thoughts. I haven't made any headway, although she has started sort of asking me a bit more about it, and I get a sense that she is picking something up, but not much. But any guidance you could give me, I mean, I realize that listening silently is probably the best thing for me to do right now, given that I don't have the words. The words aren't coming for me easily to express anything, but any guidance you have would be very, very welcome. Thank you.
Can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure.
How long have you been inquiring into the principles?
I first came across the principles about...
Distinctly, because I want to make sure we get to other people, but...
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, about, I think it was January of last year.
Okay.
But I've been a seeker all my life in Advaita and other things. And so when I came to the 3 principles, it was like an aha moment, confirming everything I'd studied up to now, with the added plus of giving me a functional, practical way of applying it in everyday life.
And which of Mr. Banks's books have you read?
Which books have I read? Oh my goodness, a lot of them.
Mr. Banks's book.
The Missing Link, Dear Liza, Beyond Belief, Second Chance. I don't remember. I think I've had every single one of them in my hand at different times, but I haven't been able to yet read all of them because I don't own all of them.
Quest of the Pearl is the sequel to Second Chance. Have you read that?
Which one?
That Quest of the Pearl. It's the
Yes,
sequel.
I have read that one.
And The Enlightened Gardener and The Enlightened Gardener Revisited.
The Enlightened Gardener Revisited, I've read in the whole thing, and the other one, bits and pieces here and there.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've watched his videos?
I have. At first, I couldn't relate to them because he was using words in ways that didn't correspond to my studies up to that point. But now, as part of the Beyond course, I've been asked to watch specific ones, and I've watched them many times. And whenever I can, I watch others as well.
And they're available for free on the www.sidbanks.com.
Yes, thank you. I did know that, and I've got it written down somewhere. I need to go back and find it.
Well, I'm going to put this on the back burner right now.
Mm-hmm.
And
thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, you can hear me.
And your name?
Mimi.
Mimi. Okay, Mimi.
Bill, I've once listened to a really nice audio you did where you basically explained that any disease or ailments are basically alarm bells going off in the body.
Okay.
I'm very interested in the body and really also interested in kind of where does disease come from? Why do we get sick? So I've spoken to a few people about it, and this, according to the understanding, you have thoughts, we don't really know where they come from, and they generate a feeling. So I just really wonder if you could go a little bit deeper on how do you then maybe create a disease in the body. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes some assumptions that I may not agree are true.
Okay.
But what I hear you saying is something about what is your question about? What exactly is the question? Because you jumped about thoughts come from we don't know where and they cause a feeling, and how do we create, and then you jump to how do we create disease?
Because I guess from what I understand, if you have maybe recurring thoughts and fears about something, could they create this disease in your body?
Okay.
That's always just been something in the back of my mind that I've wondered about.
And your exposure to the principles, and you've read Mr. Banks's books and watched his videos?
I've watched a few. I've read, I think, 2 books.
Okay. Which one?
Enlightened Gardener Revisited, and The Missing Link.
Okay. Has it been hard to find The Enlightened Gardener? Is that why The Enlightened Gardener Revisited has?
No. Well, from what I remember, I think the first one is more expensive or something.
Okay.
When I saw it, that's what I remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
But
okay. Well, but
I'll be really honest with you. I haven't really focused too much on SID. It's more, I'm connected to so many different people sharing it, and my own understanding of what it is.
Okay. Anyone else before I go?
Okay, thank you, Mimi. Will you unmute yourself, Tanya, please?
Hi. So I have a different kind of question.
Sorry, your name?
Sorry, my name's Tanya. I've been around the principles since early 2015.
Okay.
Read about 4 or 5 of Sydney Banks' books.
Okay.
And I work with women through midlife, helping them see that they don't need to blame their hormones, actually, and that their symptoms are expression of mind. And I've really recently I've come to see, and there's a lot of talk in the community about is there only universal thought, is there personal thought, is there free will, not free will, this whole discussion. And looking into that, I've seen, well, it's actually, for me, it's not really important. And the only thing, as Sydney Banks would say, is search for the feeling. The feeling is the divine. The feeling is the divine expression.
Sorry. The feeling is what?
Is divine expression of mind. And the way that I see it is that the feeling is our body's response to thought.
So which is it? Is it divine expression of mind or the body's response?
I see both.
Oh,
I see
okay.
that the feeling is the body's response to thought. It's always the body's response to thought, and that's always divine.
Okay.
So this is something that I've recently sort of understood in that way, and I haven't really heard it in that way. And that my understanding is that the feeling is the body's response. If we don't pay attention to the feeling, then the feeling gets stronger. I mean, unless it's the good feeling, and then we can keep on going in the good feeling. But if we're caught in certain thinking, and our body's responding and trying to communicate with us through feeling, and if we don't pay attention, then it will get stronger, and then maybe it will lead to depression or lead to symptoms. But that is all divine.
So what is the question?
So my question is that, because that's how I see it now, but I haven't really heard that spoken about. I haven't really heard feelings and symptoms spoken about as divine, which is, I see it now as the body's divine reaction. It is a divine expression of mind. So I'm now sharing that, but I'm sharing that because that's what feels right to me.
Sure.
But so I'd love it if you could comment on that.
Okay. And besides the books that you've read, watched Mr. Banks's videos, or?
Yes.
Do you have a favorite, or?
Well, the missing link. I mean, well, the book.
I mean, as far as the videos.
Videos.
Have you watched like the Long Beach tapes and the Washington lectures and the Hawaii tapes? Or?
You know, I can't remember which ones I've watched. I have some CDs and I've watched some online. And
does everybody know that all of Mr. Banks's videos, because of the generosity of Shane Kennedy, who's the CEO of Lone Pine Publishing, the website www.sydbanks.com has all of Mr. Banks's videos for free to be watched by anywhere around the world. In the center,
I didn't know that, actually.
Go to that website, www.sydbanks.com. 3 circles will come up, and one is watch, listen, read. And it'll tell you what you can listen to. That they have DVDs. Some of the books have actually been narrated. Second Chance and Quest of the Pearl are on CDs, and there's things on DVDs, and then there's also then a read. You can download the books for $10.99. I think each one of them, including the Enlightened Garden. And then you can purchase the hardcover or softcover books that are available. And under Watch, in the middle, it'll have the Long Beach tapes, which is the first time in 2000. Mr. Banks was 70 years old. It was the first time that he allowed himself to be videotaped, because he said, I don't want followers. I will speak to clergy. I will speak to mental health professionals. I will speak to doctors. I will speak to educators, but I don't want followers. And we talked him into being videotaped. Somebody's got some noise coming that isn't
It's me.
muted. So we told him that we knew that we understood that, but also that he wasn't going to live forever. And he died 9 years later in 2009. And we luckily he agreed to be videotaped. And so the ones that are on there are the 3-day program in Long Beach that was edited down to 3 about 30-minute videos and a 45-minute video. And they're all in 15-minute segments, so you can watch them in 15-minute segments. I usually would have my clients and my patients in the inpatient unit watch them twice through, and I have had literally people whose lives transformed in 2 watchings of those videos. I had a man the other day who came to our Linden Mind Never Broken, Nothing Lacking course that watched just the Great Illusion twice, and after 44 years of torment, he's living in a feeling of love for his wife and his child and his life that he just in a level of peace he's never dreamed for. So they're very powerful. The one to the right, the Washington lectures, were taken from a time when Mr. Banks came to West Virginia University, where he was a consultant for almost 10 years before he died, consultant to the medical school. So he came and there's only 2 there. One is a 19-minute, very profound explanation of the principles, the 3 principles, and then a 24-minute presentation of separate realities. And then the 3rd set on the left is the Hawaii lectures. The first 2, I think because of my wife's battle with cancer, I was at neither of those, although Sid was my mentor for 26 years, and being the only psychiatrist for so many years, he kind of took me under his wing. But you'll see a young me at the Hawaii lectures, along with God love them, 3 or 4 people, if not more, that are no longer with us. Bob Cousin and Richard Carlson's father, and Roger Mills, and different people that have passed on. But those Hawaii lectures were just 3 weeks after 9/11. So the first thing that Mr. Banks does is thanks people for having the courage to fly 3 weeks after 9/11. And the only thing that I would tell people, because my wife and I made a mistake, and other people have made this mistake with people that are just being exposed to the 3 principles. At the beginning of the Hawaii lectures, have you seen those, Mimi? Have you seen the Hawaii lectures? Tammy, have you seen the Hawaii lectures? You can nod or no. Have you seen the Hawaii lectures? No, okay. Anyway, so there's a wise Hawaiian lady who's a kahuna and she's very well loved and respected in the Hawaiian community, and she puts a lei of flowers over Mr. Banks's shoulders as a sign in their culture that we have a respected teacher that has come to talk with us, and we want to honor and show our respect for him by putting this lei of flowers on his shoulders. Well, we made the mistake of playing that in the Bible Belt down in West Virginia, and people immediately saw cult and would not listen pretty much to any words after that. And I have no blame for them. They're doing the best that they knew, but they didn't understand the context of what that was in. So okay. Well, let me put these 3 questions in the back, and then let's make sure we revisited them. And I thank each one of you for doing that. Any more before we want to go forward, Diane, or is that enough? Or?
Yes. Right now, what I really want to hear now, if that's okay with you, is your experience, so that we can live up to the title of the series, Living a Gentler Life, and then We can
Well,
add the questions later. Yeah,
I
please.
will do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Living a gentler life. It wouldn't have taken too much on April Fool's Day of 1983. And many of you have probably heard the story, but I'll do it because that's where it starts. I mean, in April 1st, April Fool's Day, 1983, I had met Dr. George Pransky earlier in the year of 1983, and we had met a couple of times, and I knew that he was speaking truth, but I didn't understand very much. I knew it had something to do with thought. He asked me if I would come and listen to Mr. Banks, who was this welder with a 9th grade education who had had a profound experience, a 3-day experience that culminated in a very powerful experience, and which he retells, if anybody's interested and hasn't listened to, on the third lecture of the 4 lectures of the Long Beach series. He talks about the experience and he explains what happened. All he wanted to do was to stop bickering with his wife. He said, I wouldn't even known how to spell the word enlightenment. And yet what happened was so powerful. And I know I'll get to myself, but when I hear so many people say that they've read of a lot of other people's books and they've listened to a lot of other people and they kind of touched on Mr. Banks, I'm reminded that if I was learning physics and the relativity, I don't know that I would focus first on 2nd and 3rd generation physicists. I would want to listen to Einstein's first 3 papers from 1905 on relativity. And the other thing I would say about that is when people tell me they're enlightened, I have kind of this is kind of humorous. I mean, I'm saying that with the tongue in cheek, but not too much tongue in cheek. Mr. Banks, George Pransky, and his colleagues, and I gave talks there along with Dick and Bettinger and Sandy Crott and Keith Blevins. Dr. Pransky consulted to a company called British Air Electronics, which is a defense contractor based in London that has 7,000 U.S. employees and 13,000 UK employees. And Dr. Pransky consulted with them for 12 years. And I believe it was about halfway through, about 6 years, and they were doing programs, and I did them there too, 4.5-day programs for 30 people at a time in this defense contractor. And it affected people's lives so much that their efficiency and their work went to where their bottom line went sky high because they were meeting deadlines instead of overrunning in them, etc. But after about 6 years, a group of PhD physicists, and I need to check with Dick Bezoyan, who's a friend of mine, who was the head of human resources at BAE. After about 6 years, they came to Dick and they said, Dick, these are PhD physicists from MIT here in the United States, which is where the smartest of smartest get to go. And we want to hear from Mr. Banks, right? So at first, Dick, even though he had incredible respect, he was a little bit leery. Here I'm having this welder with a 9th grade education who's read 4 welding books in his life talk to PhD physicists from MIT. Have you heard this story, Diane? So I recently contacted Dick because I always told the story that he was invited back once, and Dick, because I didn't want to be exaggerating, and Dick said, rather than making the fish bigger than it was, you made it smaller than it was. He said, here's what happened. He came, and Sid came for 3 days. We paid him as a consultant, and these PhD physicists from MIT, and I sat in on it, and he taught physics to them for 3 days. PhD physicists from MIT. And after 3 days, they came to me and they said, will you please, whatever you have to pay him, will you please hire him back to come teach us for 3 more days? So he did. He had him come back for 3 more days, and after 3 more days of teaching them, PhD physicists from MIT, they came back to him a second time and said, will you please, this will be the last, one more time, would you have him come and teach us for 3 more days? I will tell you, I've been learning this for 35 years, and I don't know that I feel like I could sit with PhD physicists from MIT and teach them physics for 9 days. And if you find any other teacher of the principles or writer of a book in the principles that you hold higher in esteem than what Mr. Banks, and it's not Mr. Banks as a person, it's what he was allowed to see. He was allowed a peek into the mind of God. Like, I don't know that there's been very many people that got a peek that he got. And so my respect for him is not as much for him as a person, but for what he was allowed to see. So we'll take you back to April Fool's Day, 1983. And that's why I've had people call me wanting to pay me for pretty fair money and to consult with them. And I say, you know, here's what I'm going to recommend. I'm going to recommend you read all 6 of Mr. Banks's books twice through. And you watch his 3 sets of videos twice through. And you sit and reflect at least for 10 days. And then if you still have questions, give me a call. Because your money will be much better spent, because your questions will be from a much more grounded place, and you'll have much better chance of hearing any answer that I point to, rather than doing it beforehand. So that's just to know where my grounding is. So on April 1st of 1983, I sat with about 200 people in San Francisco, and Mr. Sidney Banks was talking. And I was 41 years old. I had been in psychiatry for almost 9 years. I had been a physician for 5 years before I became a psychiatrist. 2 years I was 36 on, 12 off in a surgery residency. I was initially going to be a heart surgeon. And I'd been going in and out of clinical depression from age 21 and never hospitalized, but on medicines a couple of times for a short time. It didn't seem to do much good. And suicidal, I had those thoughts, almost, almost pulled in front of an 18-wheeler more than once probably, but didn't. And so glad for the other people as well as myself. But in a lot of pain that I had to force myself through college, force myself through medical school at times, force myself to get out of bed and continue my residency in psychiatry, and even in my years functioning as a psychiatrist, oftentimes having tears running down my cheek as I got up in the morning or at noon. Now, here I was, and I had nearly 800 lectures on mental illness. And as many of you have heard me say, I had not one lecture on mental health. 0. And yet, when I got board certified in psychiatry, they called me a mental health professional. Would have been much more accurate to call me a mental illness professional, because that's what I was an expert in. And I was an expert in the psychopharmacology and the medicines used to try to clean up the biochemical dysregulation and contamination, that chronic activation of the stress response through negative thinking, worry, guilt, resentment, upset, overanalysis, unresolved grief creates. And as I sat there, within 15 minutes of listening to Mr. Banks quietly, maybe at first I had a bunch of yeah buts, yeah but, Yeah, but I'm sure none of you have ever had those. Yeah, but. And then I relaxed and I started listening. And within 15 or 20 minutes, I knew that this man with a ninth grade education and his 4 welding books read and his experience profound knew, I don't know how you quantify it, thousands of times more about mental health than I did. Because I knew very, very little. Didn't experience it most of the time. And even when I did, I was in constant fear that I would lose it because I didn't know where it came from. I used to say it was like depression was a black cloud that even when I wasn't in it was walking about 2 steps behind me saying, I can have your ass anytime I want it. So you better not get too arrogant. So what happened for me, I sat there and something happened that was beyond thought, but there was hope awakened in my heart. I had hope awakened. That, first of all, I knew who had been creating my depression for 21 years. It was me. I came to see very clearly that I was probably spending 6 to 9 hours a day in some form of stressful thinking, as if I was doing this all day and then at the end of the day being very surprised that I had a right-sided headache, wondering where it was come from. I had gotten divorced from my first wife that I loved very, very, very much. We'd been together almost 10 years. And I started to see the glimpse of separate realities that every human being in the world was making a movie. And everybody was thinking that their movie was the correct movie. And I saw that instead of listening to each other, my wife and I had spent so much time arguing about who was right. It saddened me. I was an angry person. I was easy to anger. At my worst, I probably had 5 to 7 to 10 hissy fits a day because people were constantly pissing me off. I had no idea that I had the piss-off machine in my back pocket. It appeared to me that they were doing things that were causing me to be pissed off. I started to have experiences where I would see myself creating anger, and I would like the Wizard of Oz, I would pull back the curtain and realize it was me that was starting to think up a bunch of angry thoughts and give life to them. So I started to get a glimpse that I was the agent of my experience, and it was incremental. It wasn't, some of you have heard the antidote, and it's a true story. It's 6 months after, to take a little transgression to show how limited my insight was. 6 months later, I was working at a state hospital, and I had a man, and many of you have probably heard this, and I had a man tell me in London 2 years ago or a year and a half ago that couldn't be true, basically called me a liar. And I told him I was too old to lie. I have to go to bed with what I say and do. During the day, I go to bed with that at night. Maybe when I was young, I was willing to go to bed with some lies, but I'm not willing to do that anymore. And what happened was that I was in a state hospital in Galesburg, Illinois, with doing a group for, and I won't give the long version, but giving a group with 22 patients with chronic schizophrenia. And it was the third group session, and I was talking to them about the principles as much as I knew in 1983, after 6 months after meeting Mr. Banks and spending some time with him and Dr. Pransky. And he sat with his, how many people, has everybody heard this story? Because if you have, I don't need to. Okay. So there was this man named Herb. I don't know if I knew him for sure then. There was 22 people trying to learn their names. He was sitting with his chair askew, kind of half in and half out. In the first two groups and this third group halfway through, he was talking, having a conversation with voices that no one else could see except him. And he was carrying on this conversation. And halfway through that group, something happened which was very profound. He started laughing, and he laughed from such a powerfully deep place, that everybody in the room could not stop laughing. Have other people have that experience? And you're holding your stomach, your eyes are watering, you're begging the person to stop because you have no idea what they're laughing about. And we were all there, 22 patients with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and the psychologist and myself begging Herb to stop. What's so funny? And this is, you know, there's a joke in sometimes in the United States because NSA supposedly surreptitiously, you know, listens in on people at times. And this is one time I wish they would have been videotaping me super surreptitiously, because I'd have record of what happened. And finally, after what seemed like forever, maybe it was 3 minutes, maybe it seemed like 7 to 10 minutes, finally Herb's laughing started to subside. He wiped his eyes. He started breathing normal. And once I felt like he could hear me, I said, Herb, what was so funny? And Herb took his chair, he picked it up, he put it in the group, he sat down, and he looked across the room from me. He said, Doctor, while you were talking, I suddenly realized that I have been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years. Now, up to that point, Herb and I were kind of equal. I had also seen that I'd been making myself depressed for 21 years. But the second part has been a incremental journey for the last 35 years that Herb saw in that instant. He said, I've realized that I've been making myself crazy with my own thinking for 47 years. And I've also realized, Doctor, that I don't have to do it anymore. Wow. It took me a number of years to see that. I even had thoughts come out of my computer like, wow, I don't mind helping people, but this is a little too much. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up for people that had been diagnosed schizophrenic, mostly in the hospital for 47 years in a state hospital, to get back in touch totally with their mental well-being that cannot be broken, cannot be scratched, cannot be injured. You can imagine whoever asked the question about physiology, his physiology changed in that instant incredibly dramatically. he started having within hours, terrible side effects from his medicines. And I had to, with my knowledge of medicines, get him off of them one by one as quickly as I could. Because if you come off medicines too quickly, there's a problem too. Although I don't know, maybe his state of mind would have taken care of it. I got him off all his medicines in probably about 3 to 4 weeks. And I was going to discharge him, and the head of the hospital said, "You can't do that. He's got chronic schizophrenia. He's been in the hospital for 47 years. I said, "He's fine." He said, "Keep him for 4 more weeks, and I'll get reports from the nurses and the psychologist and everybody else." I said, "Fine." He got discharged. I had a 3-year follow-up where he was living in an apartment in Rock Island, Illinois, going down to the senior citizen center every day, playing cards, dancing, going to movies, playing bingo. Had lots of friends that would come over to his apartment. We would do things together, go to parks, do things. He was on no medications. He was fine. Mine was more incremental. The times that I got angry started to lessen. The length of time that I stayed angry started to lessen. And the depth of how I acted and things I did when I was angry got less, because I had some sense that I was not in my right mind. And I had some sense to keep my mouth shut and my hands to myself. And even though when I was in an upset state of mind, I would experience a sense of dis-ease where I would want to do something or take something or do something that would hit my reward system. I wasn't perfect at that, but it started to become less and less. And as it did, my life got gentler and gentler. I remember one morning I was very busy after my fellowship in psychiatry. After my fellowship, a year later, I did a 10-month fellowship with Dr. Roger Mills and Rick Suarez and Kim Kadu, 3 PhD psychologists that Mr. Banks was teaching and now was starting to teach me. And I was in private practice, and I was very busy, and I got busier because the doctors were not used to having a psychiatrist really help their patients. So I would finish my day in the clinic, and I would have 4 and 5, sometimes 6 consults to the hospital that had to be done within 24 hours. That was my agreement as a faculty member of the hospital. To have privileges, you had to answer a consult and complete it within 24 hours. So I would come home and grab a quick bite to eat with my wife and 4 children, including 2 little girls. And I'd go back to the hospital till 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, come home close to midnight, sleep for 6 hours, and do the same thing, which wasn't healthy, wasn't balanced. And now I would have known that I would have had to cut back on my clinic hours to make room for the consults. But I didn't. Wisdom has come slow for me. I tell people I learned slowly. And I think sometimes it has made me a better teacher because I myself have learned slowly. It's been incremental. I've seen a little bit at a time. And it helps me have compassion for those that are like myself, learning incrementally. And I always tell people that direction is the key. If you're here in the United States and in Phoenix, Arizona, or in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, if I wanted to get to Alaska, it would be much better that I be going 5 miles an hour north than 80 miles an hour south. It's not about the speed, it's about direction. And I remember one morning when I was very busy, I was in my car going between the two hospitals. I'd run to one hospital on one side of town and done a couple of consults early in the morning and having to get to my other hospital by 7 o'clock. And as I was going, I got calls from 3 different nurses. And I was not in a good mood. I was just starting to learn. I was in a bad mood, and I didn't know how to deal with that. And what happened was each one of the calls that I got from 3 or 4 nurses ended up badly, either with them slamming the phone down or me slamming the phone down. And at my level of consciousness, I thought, wow, here I'm having a tough day and I have to run into 4 bitches in a row. That's how accountable I was. And then I had a thought saying, wait a minute, Bill. What did you have to do with those conversations? And I called each one of those 4 nurses back one by one, and I apologized to them. I told them that I was out of line and give me another chance to listen to what they were trying to tell me and see if I could be of help to them, since they're the ones that are taking care of the patients all day long, not me. And I heard later from some of those nurses, not all of them, that they'd never had a doctor ever apologize to them. They didn't know what to do with that, but they were very grateful for it. So to me, it was, I started when my wife and I would see things differently. We eventually got back together, and we had 18 years together before she died of cancer in 2000. And we got closer and closer because when we saw things and experienced things differently, we had such love and respect for each other that both of us, and I learned to listen from her a lot. I've learned to listen a lot from my second wife, Linda, who I've been married with almost 15 years. We had both been widowed about 3 years when we met, 2003. And from both of the women that I've been married to, I've learned to be a better listener. You'd think as a psychiatrist I would have been a good listener, but I wasn't. I would listen until I thought I had something to say, instead of truly listening to see what the person was trying to communicate. And I started listening to my wife in ways that I hadn't ever before, to truly understand what her world was like, that she saw, knowing that it was different from mine. And in doing so, in listening from a deep level, my world got bigger. My world got bigger. And we got closer and closer because there was always love and respect. And we learned that when we weren't in our right mind, it wasn't a good time to talk. Even though some people used to say, you can't go to sleep until you finish the argument. Or, well, that's nonsense. If you're not in your right mind, it's best that you get a good night's rest. And then see if the world looks a little different the next day. Some of you, but not all of you, may have heard the story about Beverly Wilson, who I think would be fine with me telling this because she's told the story many times. And she was in one of the housing projects where Dr. Mills came, and she'd struggled with heroin addiction for years, and she had been through many treatments, and she heard something and changed her life. She not only got peace of mind, but she got her GED, and then she eventually got her bachelor's degree, and eventually she got her master's degree, and she has a consulting firm. She and her husband have a consulting firm now out in California. And one time she was in the back of the room when Judy Sedgman and Roger Mills were speaking to a group of 500 people in the Bronx in New York. And they had people from Dr. Mills's housing project that he was working with, and Judy Sedgman was working with Pransky and Associates at the time and was consulting to a huge hospital in the Bronx. And they got about 250 from each, and they were going to do a 3-day program on the 3 principles. And Dr. Mills and now Dr. Sedgman, she didn't have her doctorate yet at that time, Miss Sedgman, they were talking, and in the back of the room was Beverly. And Beverly probably at this time had her GED it was in the early 90s, and she was doing online courses and taking courses to get her bachelor's degree. And they were talking, and both Judy Sedgman and Roger Mills have IQs that probably, of course Roger's passed, but brilliant. They're probably 50 points higher than mine. And not that mine's very high, but it did get me through medical school. But they got a little bit too cerebral this day. And you talked about it, Diane, that this is not about the intellect. It's not about intellectual understanding. And they kind of fell into it a little bit. And the questions were coming from intellect, and the answers were coming from, and people were very confused, and the feeling level was dropping. And at this point, Beverly came walking up from the back of the room. Now think of this. It's a lady who in the past, probably within 2 or 3 years, was frightened to even go outside of her house and used heroin to try to deal with her fears. And she walks up from the back of the room with 500 people in the audience, and she says to Dr. Mills, "Dr. Mills, would you please sit down?" And he respected her, so he did. He said, "Miss Sedgman, would you please sit down?" And she said, "Of course, Beverly." So she sat down. How many people have not heard this story about Beverly? No, some haven't. Okay. So Beverly, if you can see me, Beverly, and I asked her, I heard about this 10 years before I finally had a chance to have dinner again with Beverly. I hadn't seen her for a while. And I had dinner with Joe Bailey and she and her husband and Joe's wife, Michael. And I said, "Did this really happen?" And I told her what I'd been told. And she kind of sheepishly said, "Well, yeah, that pretty much gets what happened." So I said, so she got to the front of the room. There's 500 people confused. She said, "Listen, people, this is not rocket science." God made us to be in our right mind. We're spiritual beings. He made us to be there and to know that. But he gave us a free will. So we can think, pay attention to and give life to whatever thoughts we want to, and nobody can make us not do it. So we can think ourselves out of our right mind and be over here. Now, this is your home. So if you want to get back home, there's 3 things that are important to remember. When you're not in your right mind, your IQ is about -10. So it's real simple. You keep your mouth shut. Number 2, you keep your hands to yourself. You don't throw anything. You don't throw anything at anybody. You don't hit anybody. And number 3, leave your thinking alone until you feel better. And before you know it, you'll be back home. Notice she didn't say fight like your negative thoughts like hell. She didn't say distract yourself in any way you can. She didn't say try really, really hard to think positive thoughts. She said as best as you can, leave your thinking alone until you feel better. And you'll be back home soon. And she went and sat down. And one by one, people said, "Well, why didn't you people tell us that? That makes sense." We want to make it more complicated than it is. It is a lighthearted, loving feeling that we're looking for. One time, my wife Linda asked Sid, because we were together for 6 years before he passed, and she said to Sid, she said, Sid, people a lot of times say that love is enough. Love is the curative agent. Is love enough? And Sid kind of got quiet, and he just was quiet for a little bit. And then he said, Linda, love and understanding is enough. Love and understanding is enough. And I've had some sense of that, but I will tell you, I had an experience watching a movie that I'm going to share with you on the plane out to the Midwest, and it really hit this home for me. And what I saw was that there really, and you could say, well, there's levels of understanding and levels of consciousness Sid would talk about, but I'm going to talk about the two extremes. What there really is there's two levels. One is love and understanding, and the other is love without understanding. I suppose you could do it this way, because when you have love and understanding, you're usually feeling pretty good. But I watched a movie on the way out to the Midwest about 3 weeks ago, and I was going to do some family stuff, but also do some three principles presentations. And I watched a movie, and it was called Thank You for Your Service. And it was about four soldiers from the United States who had fought in the Iraq War in the same company. And they were coming home to their fiancés, their wives, their families. And they had horrible problems. One of them put a bullet through his head right in front of his fiancée, and it's based on a true story. She worked as a teller in the bank and had left him. In the United States, we're losing to suicide a veteran every 22 seconds. In Vietnam, we lost 58,000 soldiers on the ground were killed. In 1996, I knew a man who used to be a gunner on a helicopter plane in Vietnam that later became a therapist and also was connected to the people in Washington. This was 1996, 97 maybe, over 20 years ago. He told me at that time there had been approximately 300,000 suicides of Vietnam veterans. 5 times as many people that died on the battlefield. As I watched this movie, I really saw its love and understanding, because these men had love. They had tremendous love in their hearts. They loved each other. They carried each other injured off the battlefield, even when the other one weighed 30 to 40 pounds heavier than they did. They didn't care. They had tremendous love for their fiancés and their children and their wives when they came back. But they did not have understanding of what they were as human beings, that they were divine energy, and that they were using that divine energy to create their experience. And they didn't know not to be frightened by the experience that came when thoughts would get triggered and memories would get triggered. They didn't have enough understanding. So without the understanding, they lived in hell in their head, fighting their demons. And I saw the clarity that there's always love. Love is never absent. But it's hard to express the core love that we are. You know, Sid one time on one of the Hawaii lectures, he said, divine mind is pure love and understanding. And if you look at human beings when they're at their best, when they're not bothered by ego or insecurity, what you see is love and understanding. You see profound, unconditional love. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes to just tell you what the 3 principles are to me, because I'm surprised when I have time to have people tell me what the 3 principles. I'm just saying the way that, please, as Sid says, don't believe anything I say. Just be willing to listen, if you will. If what I say resonates with truth within you, then it'll be your truth, not mine. The scientists tell us that there, about 13.8 billion years ago, there was something that happened called the Big Bang. I know there are people that have beliefs that it happened 6,000 years ago, and I'm not going to argue with anybody. Let's just say that there was a time when there was no form. Most people agree with that. But there was something formless. To me, it was an intelligent, loving energy. And scientists, physicists for years used to say, well, there was a little bit of matter. It was really compressed. It was on like the 1/1,000,000th of a top of a needlepoint, and that's where the universe came from. And I don't know about you, but my bullshit meter just goes, bullshit. And I've talked to some physicists in recent years that say, yeah, we had trouble accepting that there was no form. But we now accept that pretty much in the community, there was a formless energy. Now, when that Big Bang occurred, and by the way, I had a physician resident, he's in medical school, he said he hadn't heard this. 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, the physicists who won the Nobel Prize from 2 physicist groups around the world from each other in their own research have come to show that creation is actually accelerating. 13.8 billion years later, it's going faster and faster. Now, I don't know about your intellect, but my intellect can't wrap around like I won't use a really bad word, I'll just use a medium word. Where the hell is it going that it's expanding? It's expanding into the nothingness, right? Anyway, it's expanding faster. The creation is going faster and faster. So Sid used to talk about there was the great nothingness. That's universal mind. He said when universal thought got activated, there was the great isness, all of creation, everything. And together it's the great allness. Now, when I was a kid and we taught a lot of religious stuff, some of it to me was nonsense and even looks like psychotic now. But one of the things that doesn't look psychotic is that I was told that God was everywhere. Now, it seemed a little weird. That meant everywhere meant, this piece of paper, pair of glasses, this mouse, everywhere is everywhere. Now I get it. I get it. Because everything that has form has to be made of the formless energy from which it has its source. It can't be anything from anyplace else. So in answer to someone's question, everything is divine energy. Everything is the same energy. Even Einstein said that. The entire universe is the same energy in a different disguise. Now, What he wasn't talking about was the formless energy too, although he'd point to that sometimes. When he said things like the intuitive mind, which I would say is wisdom, is the wisdom beyond the intellect. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift. I think that was Einstein's way. Sacred is the way of saying it's coming from the divine, that which was there before any form. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift. It's rational, analytical mind. It's faithful servant. However, we have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Divine mind, to me, universal mind, is the intelligent energy of all things. Universal thought is the power. There's only one mind. There's the divine mind, and we just have our own hookup to the main computer that we get to use the power of divine mind in a personal way. But we are that energy. We are divine energy. Some people say saying that you're a drop in the ocean is not the same as saying you're the ocean, but it's saying you're not disconnected from it. Rumi, on the other hand, the poet from Persia, said, you're the ocean in a drop. Maybe pointing more in the direction of the truth. Because we are that which we seek, as Sid says. And we're using that energy to create our experience every moment of our life. So consciousness is the gift of awareness. It's both what makes everything look real to us. It's what takes our thinking and makes it look real to us. And also there's levels of consciousness. There's levels of understanding. When Sid says your thoughts and feelings are a mirror of your soul, what he's saying is, to me, that he always says that pure soul is pure consciousness. Your thoughts and feelings are a mirror of how clear your consciousness is, how uncontaminated it is by insecurity and ego. Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the Inspector General of the United Nations back when I was a kid, he was killed, and he used to say that what you want to do is, he was a deeply spiritual man. He said, you are not the source of the light. You are only a lens. The less you have yourself out of the way, you make a clear lens for the light to come through and be shared. And I think that's true. I kiddingly say, I know when I start to cloud that lens, because it means my ego's gotten involved, or my insecurity. I was telling somebody earlier today, I said, if I lose my billfold, I don't know whether I'll get it back or not. I may or may not. It may be long gone. But the assuring thing is, every time I lose my humility, I know I will get it back. Because the only reason I lose my humility is I let my ego or my insecurity direct me to which thoughts I pay attention to. So as I go back to the three questions very quickly and leave time for other questions, what I know is you have to be guided by your own wisdom. What I would do is probably sit with this lady and watch the 4 Long Beach tapes, 15 minutes at a time. And I'd say, just tell me what you see. I might even read Dear Liza with her. I had a man who had been, as a kid, every day he came home from age 6 to 14, he was locked in a basement and sodomized, rectal intercourse by his stepfather forcibly, under threat of tremendous threat. Every day. He ended up being hospitalized 86 times at the state mental hospital. I was there about the last 15, 16 months at the medical school, and I had him as a patient a number of times, and other people dreaded when they saw that he was on their admission list. I got excited because I knew that he 86 times in the state hospital had nothing to do with who he was. No diagnostic label does any more than try to describe where a person is. It has nothing to do with who a person is. Zero. I knew that who he was pure divine energy. He was God energy. And I was moved one day to take Dear Liza, and I read his little 88-page book. For those that haven't read it, it does not mention the principles once. It teaches through letters that this little 11-year-old girl who's living on her own in buildings, in abandoned buildings in London in 1834, and taking care of a little 5-year-old she found with bruises all over her body on the wharf. It doesn't mention, but it has a feeling that's powerful. And at one point, as I was reading that book to him, he suddenly started sobbing uncontrollably. He sobbed and sobbed for a number of minutes, and I just put a little box of tissue close to him and sat with him as a human being on the road of life, trying to find home just like he is. And finally, after a number of minutes, again, he wiped his eyes, he started breathing normal, and he said, "Dr. Pettit, these tears are not tears of sadness. This is the first time my heart has been touched since I was 6 years old when I shut it off." Wow. I had a veteran who the VA refused to admit him anymore after 45 years. And his story was, as an 18-year-old boy, he was on patrol, and a young Vietnamese 12-year-old came upon their patrol, and the lieutenant said, "Tie her to a tree and slit her throat." He said, "I can't do that." He said, "You will, or I will shoot you in the back of the head, and then I will do it." War is insane. He did it. And for 45 years, every night, he saw her looking defiantly into his eyes as he slit her throat. Most of PTSD the cure is not psychological, it is spiritual. I don't know if there's reincarnation, I don't know what there is, but I know that the soul of that little girl is fine. And she probably for 45 years, if she has any ability to send any messages, has tried to let him know that she's fine. And finally, as we talked the principles and read, and I don't know what I read to him, whether it was Dear Liza, whether it was a missing link, but Second Chance maybe. I remember the day he came in and he said, "Doctor, I think I'm ready to forgive myself." And I said, 45 years, that's a pretty good sentence. I'm glad. Because we can't give the love that we have when we're burdening ourselves with pain and hardly keeping ourselves above the drowning. It's hard to give the love that we have. So I'm going to stop there and leave a little room for, I could tell, I was in Israel for 13 days in 2008 with Rabbi Chaim Levine, working with soldiers with PTSD from the 2 Lebanon wars. And, I could easily have been in Lebanon with somebody, because their soldiers the same. Both sides. It's not taking sides. It happened to be he wanted me to come and help with these PTSD soldiers. And after about 6 days, Rabbi Chaim Levine said, "I have a new name for you." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Bill, do you have time for a story, Pettit?" That's supposed to be a joke, folks. Now, Diane, you're still caught back with that story I told, aren't you? Or are you? I hesitate, but it came to me. That's part of life, and we need to address that killing another human being when we're all the same energy makes no sense. But it makes sense at a level of understanding where you don't have that level of understanding. Anyway.
I have no words, Bill. Yes, that story. Yes, that story did really, really touch me. But it, what comes after and the healing that comes after is, to me, this is it.
Right.
This is it. But
we are given within us, we because of what we are, we're given to heal from anything. And once people see that, they don't fear being blind. They don't fear being quadriplegic. I had an incredible fear all my life of being quadriplegic and having to have somebody take total care of me. It's not on my bucket list, don't get me wrong. But I don't have fear of that now. I know, and anybody that wants to read Flying Without Wings by Arnold Beiser, who became quadriplegic with polio 6 months before the polio vaccine was discovered in 1950, you will see that being quadriplegic has absolutely nothing to do with your peace of mind and your mental well-being. And I know that I would be given the understanding to know that. And that when people know that, they have no fear of anything, so they're allowed to live their life with full abundance and full joy and full contact to all the special gifts that each one of us have been given to share with the world. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Diane, but I wanted to make that statement that once you don't have fear, you're free to live your life in a loving, joyful manner.
well, you have outlined, for me, outlined is not a proper description. That I've heard some horrible stories here, which ended up with having a gentler experience of life. So, and this is exactly what I want to put forward. This is, for me, this is a message of hope. And there's more than hope here. There's so much love, there's so much understanding. And so we've reached our scope tonight. But Dominic had raised his hand earlier on, and I know there are only 5 more minutes left. So Dominic.
Well, I'm okay. I mean, I don't have an absolute time, so it'd be up to you. Just know that I'm fine on staying for a few minutes extra if we want to. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm fine.
Dominic, unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The one, Dominic, before you ask your question, the one thing I'd say, Diane, in answer to your initial thing is, I would say that every 6 months of my life, my internal experience of life has gotten gentler and gentler and gentler and more loving and less about Bill Pettit, less about me, and fuller. And the more you feel full, the less you're out there every day having to get something to make you feel good. Whether it's adoration or whether it's whatever it is, sex or that's outside the boundaries of your relationship or whatever. And all I know is that every 6 months of my life, even through deaths of people killed in car accidents and death of my wife and life ends. We all know how it ends. The key is what's our journey going to be like until we die. It seems to me like that's our choice. The more we understand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Diane, thank you so much as well for making these available. Dr. Bill, I've heard many talks from you, and I have shared those talks widely with clients and other people that I've worked with. I had a question in my mind when you were talking about the gentleman that it was where he said, I see that I've been doing this to myself for 47 years. And I realized that I don't have to. It was that story that you shared.
Right.
And I just, I guess it brings up this question about free will and choice in all of that. It's just the way how that was worded. And I wonder if you could comment about that, this idea of, where he said, I've been doing that to myself. So, yeah. Anyway.
Well, we do have a free choice, but our freedom of choice is going to be limited by our level of understanding. We always have a free choice, but we'll choose from the choices that we experience as choices. That's where psychological innocence comes in. Every human being, every moment of their life is doing the best that they know how to do, given the feeling level that they're in and the choices they feel capable of making. They might see a choice that's better than the one they do, but they don't see the capability of doing that choice, or they would do it. So there's always free will. You know who Viktor Frankl was?
Yes. Yeah.
And I am embarrassed, but to say that it took me as a psychiatrist till I was 75 years old, but I turned 76 a few days ago. And I feel younger inside than I did at 41, by the way. Not physically, but mentally I do. I don't have the same stamina I did. But, and he said he was in a death camp, He was in a death camp for 3 years and 4 months, and where 1 out of 28 survived. And he should have been, by all the today's things of trauma, and which we didn't even talk about, but he should have been, quote, incredibly traumatized, right? And died pretty early, because people with severe PTSD, because of the chronic activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the stress response, because of that, they can die as much as 2 decades earlier than they're supposed to die. Well, he lived to be either, I think it was 95 or 97, and he wrote 16 books, right? And Viktor Frankl said, between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And it is in that space that our freedom lies. Here's a man who had hours and hours and hours of times, days and times, where he experienced a quiet, loving joy in a death camp. People were dying all around him, and most of the guards were lost. An incredible state of mind. And I think, to me, the 3 principles are the most real. There's more than one way home, but the 3 principles, to me, understanding what we are as human beings, that we're divine energy. It's not just about seeing that it's all our thinking. I see people that don't understand that we are divine energy get lost in, it's only my thinking, and they're still in hell in their head, because they don't understand what that means, that we are divine energy. So I think that the 3 understanding, having insights into the nature of these 3 principles, allow people more of the time to utilize that freedom that Viktor Frankl talked about, that's between the stimulus and the response. So that's the best that I can say. Is that helpful at all? Or?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but we always have a free will, but our level of understanding will limit what choices we see. Some of you have heard me tell the story of the young man, which psychological innocence to me is true. And you can pull up any extreme you want to, but because of our limited time, I will give a quick example. This young man was being interviewed on television, and 2 months shy of his 16th birthday, he had gotten very, very angry at the principal. He put his grandpa's pistol in his pocket and brought it to school. And he walked down the hallway between classes and 2 months before his 16th birthday and put 5 bullets in the chest of the principal and killed him, and was tried as an adult and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Now, about 2 years ago in the United States, the Supreme Court ruled that all of those cases had to be reviewed for children under 18 that were put in prison for life without parole, that they had to be reviewed one at a time. But as of now, and when he was interviewed, he was about 20 years old, and he was in for life without parole the rest of his life in prison. And the interviewer, a well-known interviewer in the United States, asked what he thought about each night. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I think about. Some you'll know, and some you'll probably be surprised of. I think of walking down the hallway, thinking all the angry thoughts I was thinking to justify what I was going to do to the principal. And while I was walking down the hall, I kept having intrusive thoughts come into my mind from somewhere else. And the interviewer said, like what? What kind of thought? He said they were thoughts like, his name was Joey. Joey, this is not a good idea. Joey, you don't have to do this. Joey, this is not going to work out well for you. Joey, there's the side door. Run out it right now. All they'll do tomorrow is get you a little suspension or after hours for leaving school early. But he said to the interviewer, he said, but you know what? I overrode those thoughts with my own thoughts, my own angry thoughts. And now I'm paying the price for the rest. I did what I did and paying the price, the consequences of it, the rest of my life. But what I think about every night are two things. Where were those thoughts coming from? And number two, why didn't I have the wisdom to listen to them? There are 12 schools down around Tampa, Florida. There are a number of schools in Canada. There are a number of schools in Denmark, and I think in 2 other countries where the 3 principles, they have lesson guides. The one in Canada is called the Guide Within. It has an owl on the front, that there's a wisdom. When Sid says you are guided by a powerful spiritual energy every moment of your life, and once you truly know that, the hows and the wheres of life, you quit worry and overanalysis become the most ridiculous things in the world when you had access to divine wisdom every moment. So to me, that's the hope. As Sid said, it's going to come from teaching children, because if he would have had one of the people's classes down in Florida or in Denmark or in Canada, he would have understood the power of thought and what he was as a human being, and he would have understood where divine mind was coming in, universal mind, whatever you want to call it. People of one faith would call it the Holy Spirit. Somebody else would call it something else. He would know where those thoughts beyond his intellect and beyond his insecure thinking were coming from, and he would have responded to them and said, thank you. Thanks for saving me from a life in prison. Did he have a free will? Yeah, he had a free will. He had a free will to do the things that made the most sense to him. That's where our free will is. We have a free will to which thoughts we give life to, but if you don't know that you have a free will to do that, if that's not something you understand yet, we're limited. You're limited in your expression of your free will, but we always have a free will. And the insights, Sid says that the insights, that there's an infinite number of insights into the nature of these 3 principles. And I always kiddingly say, the last time I looked at my math book, That's a really big number. Infinite. That's supposed to be a joke too, but yeah, it's a really big number. But that was true for me, because every 6 months after I learned the principle, I'd say, oh, now I know the principles. 6 months later, I'd say, oh, shoot, I didn't know them. But now I do. 6 months later, now I do. Finally, like I said, I learned slowly. It took me about 24 months. I said, I don't. I'm in grade school. I'm in kindergarten, but I'm going to have fun. I'm going to just keep living them as best as I can, staying in the only thing that exists, the present moment. My late wife, if I can read one thought, one poem, this is going to be available on Amazon very shortly. We're in the last stages. She wrote 65 pages of rhymed poetry in iambic pentameter over a weekend after we adopted a little girl in 1984. She was 40 years old. She had not written poetry since high school, when she dabbled with it. So to write 65 pages of rhymed poetry in iambic pentameter, she didn't study Shakespeare. I don't know if she knew iambic pentameter. So I came up to her. She would go feed the baby, who was 3 weeks old, that we'd just gotten through adoption. It was half Puerto Rican and half Irish, and she's drop dead gorgeous. She's funny as hell. I have to make sure I go to take a pee before I call her on the phone, or my bladder is going to be in trouble, because she is damn funny. And here's what my late wife wrote. I said, what do you mean you're not writing? I said, where's this coming from? She said, Bill, I have no idea where it's coming from. I said, what do you mean? She said, I'm not writing it. I said, there's no one else around. So I'm telling you, I'm not writing this. My hand starts moving. I have no idea what is going to be written. Here's what she says in the preface. Coming home is about coming back to myself and my own wisdom. It's about finding that peaceful place within, a place where I feel secure and full. When you feel full, you don't have many needs. You still have preferences, but you don't have any needs. Coming home was written as a celebration, as I began to realize that the only thing that takes me away from a peaceful life is traveling in my own thoughts. Now notice she said, I began to realize. She didn't say that she saw it all at once. To come home, I only needed to understand what thought was and how I used it. When I am home, the world is a wondrous place. To all who have searched, welcome home. Is this okay, Diane? Just a couple of quickies?
I'm lost in the feeling there.
You've surrendered. Okay. Coming home, 8 lines. Coming home to peace and quiet. Coming home to feelings warm. Coming home where there's a fullness, where love in me is born. Coming home's a simple journey. It takes no movement on my part. Instead of listening to my thoughts, I listen with my heart. I'm going to do 2 more 8-line poems. And when I tell this to my clients, I kind of, in my mischievous way, I say, I'm sure my wife didn't mean this first line. I don't know what she was thinking. I'm sure she really didn't mean it, the way she wrote it. Well, no, I think she really did mean it. And now they're curious, right? Tension. Thoughts create all is a big word, all our bad feelings. If we don't know of this fact, we begin to treat our feelings real. Into them we react. Then soon it's not the task at hand that's getting our attention. Instead, we wrestle with each thought. And that creates our tension. Last one. Quiet. Quiet, when I define it, means a total lack of sound. A moment without movement. A stillness all around. Quiet, when I feel it, has a different quality. It's a full and peaceful presence permeating all of me. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I think I'm going to be known as the crybaby in this community, but I'm moved to bits. I mean, this is so much more than I expected for this call, Bill. Thank you.
You're so welcome. It is so such a blessing to have something to give. For so many years, I had the same love in my heart, but without the understanding, I was in survival myself, trying to keep my head above water. It's hard to give. I gave whenever I could. It's much easier to give when you're at peace.
I wish I could give you a big hug.
If you stop the recording, I would tell a cute story, but I wouldn't want it on the recording. Are we ready to stop the recording or not?
Yes, we are. Thank you all for joining. I
mean,
want.
They can listen to the
Of course, but I want to thank them. I want to thank them for being here.